This week, there's so much good news. First, following up on Florida's ban on bridges, last week, word came down from on high that Florida would have a freedom summer, which is to say, not freedom. All the summer lighting programs on state-owned bridges, traditions that have been in place for years, and especially the rainbow colors for Pride Month, would be canceled. Yay, liberty. Because erasing the fact of a people's existence is one of the steps necessary to erase the people themselves. But this is good news, so I'm sure you can guess what happened next. And you're right. The people stepped up and did it themselves. From the Florida Times-Union, as Pride Month dawned, 70 people gathered on Jacksonville's Main Street Bridge, armed with flashlights and gels in the 6 colors of the pride flag. They were cheered on by a large crowd on the river's banks. One of the organizers, Matt McAllister, said it was an important project because while the next bridge over was lit in red, white, and blue, having the rainbow adjacent creates a powerful symbol that freedom, actual freedom, cannot exist without diversity. He also noted that not all the participants were there primarily to support the LGBT community, though that was a bonus, but some came to protest the state's directive to nominally celebrate freedom by restricting liberty in a state quickly gaining a reputation for stripping rights and access to information from citizens. Quote, "The timing of this is really strange," he said. "The idea that we are going to celebrate freedom by giving you absolutely no choices seems Orwellian, honestly." Another participant, Sherwin Sala, one of the orange flashlights, said, quote, "The biggest thing was just showing solidarity and making sure that our freedom is holding," he said. "It was more of a fun celebration to show our community that we still stand strong." Another resident, Jessica Griffith, who celebrated from the shore, said, quote, "We're always going to celebrate who we are, welcome others, and make sure they know there are safe, wonderful, affirming, embracing places." This is the most important message, especially in places where authoritarian powers are trying to do exactly the opposite. That's what Pride is actually for. And if you enjoy thwarting the overreach of reactionaries trying to use government as a weapon, you're going to love this next story. In California, an anti-trans ballot initiative has failed. First, the story from California Public Radio. Proponents of the Restrict Rights of Transgender Youth Act, which they attempted to change to the Orwellian-themed Protect Kids Act, announced last week that they failed to collect enough signatures to get their initiative on the state ballot this November. The supporters claim the proposal would only require students to notify parents if a student is LGBT, an innocent-sounding way of saying deliberately put kids in danger, because if the kids are in a situation where the parents don't already know their status, it's often because it wouldn't be safe for those kids to come out at home. But the act would also bar trans girls, yes, only girls, from competing in sports through college when they're actual legal adults, as well as ban life-saving medical care for trans kids. But only trans kids. In other words, while these activists claim the proposal would allegedly protect kids, it does nothing of the sort for cis kids. Nothing at all, frankly. And intentionally and only puts trans kids in danger deliberately. Naturally, they sued the state to get the name of the proposal changed, but the Superior Court put an end to that, ruling that the existing description was accurate. But most importantly, the proposal fell well over 100,000 signatures short of meeting the minimum threshold to even be brought to a vote. While political demagogues in several states are passing harmful legislation from above, survey after survey, even of Republicans, even in deep red states, show time and again the people do not support this legalized hate. This failed initiative shows in a more tangible way that the overwhelming majority of people do not want this. And what makes this extra delicious is that one of the main drivers of this crap caboose is somebody you may be familiar with if you've watched my channel for very long. It's Erin Friday. For a bit of background, Erin came to fame in the gender-critical grift circle when she started bragging about torturing her child for years to force them to desist from trans expression. She also has a bit of a psychopath streak.
Anybody who is in that line of indoctrination has their head on the chopping block.
Okay.
Here she is with Peter Boghossian talking about the failed initiative and trying to get people who aren't residents of California to send in signatures. It's good to know that even with the attempt to commit fraud, even with Peter's huge platform, even with all the money behind her AstroTurf movement, she still failed. How marvelous. But let's hear a little bit about the bullet that we dodged. Here's Mrs. Friday appearing on Peter Boghossian's show to barely talk about the ballot initiative.
I think that the work you're doing is fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that.
We decided that we were going to go big and write our own laws because no one's protecting our kids in our state.
No one is protecting the kids. Strange, considering how much California has been in the news lately for laws that overly protect the kids. You'll notice that she's a little bit sped up here because she goes on a long digression. She does this multiple times. A couple will be sped up, a couple will be skipped right over. They don't actually stay on topic for most of the interview.
We wrote a ballot initiative, which will do 3 really important things and return some biological reality to our state.
The idea that there's no biological reality is a strange one to me. I'm curious. I realize that most transphobes who say this are talking about they're using biological in place of the word cis, and there's some very interesting entailments that come along with that substitution. But many of them have novel definitions, and I'm very curious what Erin's version of the word means.
You want to know what those 3 things are?
I do, but
I love how she pauses, and instead of just saying the thing she clearly wants to say, she says, do you want to maybe ask about the things?
But I know that somebody is going to be thinking here, oh, Miss Friday and Boghossian, they are grossly overestimating the scope of this problem. We're talking like 2 kids maybe in Orange County. Like what percent, can you give me some numbers of what we're talking about just to situate this contextually for is this a big problem? Like what kind of a problem is this? What are we talking about in terms of the scope of this?
I do appreciate how Peter asks some questions instead of just paving the way for Erin to make her case. Peter, of course, is known for being a once upon a time skeptical thinker, and bits and pieces of that do still remain despite his hard turn to the right. But that's neither here nor there. We do have answers for this. There are numbers, there are statistics. So this is the Tang paper that we've referenced in previous videos. It gets brought up by transphobes a lot because it specifically states that the incidence of gender-affirming mastectomy increased 13-fold between 2013 and 2020. However, that's a bit of an overdramatic statement because the total number of transgender surgeries for people under 18 in the entire United States during that 7-year period was 209. 209 over 7 years.
It's a massive problem. So I'll give you 2 data points. One,
please,
personally. So half of my daughter's Girl Scout troop came out as transgender. There's 16 of them. So we're talking 8. So that's the story. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd laugh at that too. And Erin's reaction, what the hell is that? I'm going to tell you a personal story that's totally not made up, that's impossible to verify. And also, we're kind of scrubbing the difference between kids coming out as transgender and kids getting gender-affirming surgeries. There is a little bit of difference. Going back to that previous paper, 150,000 kids nationwide. Again, there's 51 million children in the United States. 150,000 kids identify as transgender. However, out of those, 209 got surgery. So, how many of the kids in this Girl Scout troop do you reckon got surgery?
Mm-hmm. And then let's talk, real numbers. In 2020, California spent $94 million through Medi-Cal to transition kids.
It's fun that she mentions 2020 because it turns out that paper goes up through 2020. Now, I tried to find this. This is a big citation needed. I tried to find this. I could not. That information is not available. Period.
What do you mean by that? Like transitioning kids?
Excellent question, Peter. What do you mean? Because she's already conflated identifying as trans and getting surgeries. These are not the same thing, even a little bit. So what does Aaron Friday mean?
So I did a request for records, and I asked for the cost that we're paying through Medi-Cal. So, I paid for this. Everyone who pays taxes in California contributed.
Long rambling story that has nothing to do with answering Peter's question.
So that's how much money we're spending on surgeries, cross-sex hormones.
Notice her not answer the question.
Okay, that was my question.
Bit of a long pause there. Surgeries, cross-sex hormones, and
My question, you anticipated it. Is it going to be we're spending that much on mental health care, or we're spending that much on physical interventions?
So there's some mental health care involved in there too, but what they
there's some mental health care lumped in there too. Some $94 million on 209 patients. Again, across all 50 states over 7 years. She's only talking about 2020. So even if we assume the lion's share of that are in 2020, call it 100 kids, and let's assume all of them are in California. So 100 kids, $94 million. You expect me to believe that the state of California is spending almost $1 million per child on surgical interventions? But, the mental health care for the other 150,000 kids, that's only a minor detail.
That anecdote of 8 of 16, that's
big point to Peter here, too. Pointing out that Girl Scout story is an anecdote. It's not data. It's a story. It may be true, but we have no way to verify it. And coming from Aaron Friday, it's kind of sus. Sort of like the other unverifiable point. At least that one would be data if it were presented anywhere ever. If it were verifiable information with a breakdown of how much money goes where. But for all we know, she made it up.
That's literally 50% by definition. People in the Girl Scout troop.
Yes. 8 out of 16 is 50% by definition. That's correct. Good job, Peter.
Troop have come out as trans. Just to be clear, when you say transition, are you talking about like a mastectomy for a girl, like a cutting off the breasts? What do you mean by that?
Well, we who live in this space have two definitions for transitioning. One is social transition, and that's where everyone adopts the different name of the child, or haircuts or clothes, or they bind their breasts so they don't medicalize. So
Yeah. Social transition. Yes. A lot of kids do this, and that's as far as most kids go. That's all they really want, at least until they get to 18 and don't have to go through as many extra hurdles to get actual care. Or at the very least 16, which is the earliest most states will allow intervention. Now, point on California. They specifically ruled in 2023 or 2024. Remember, Aaron's data comes from 2020. But in the last year or two, there was a state level ruling that says they cannot apply a blanket minimum age. For kids younger than 16, it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But kids can't be excluded from care based purely on their age.
And then there's medical transition, which is the puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and the double mastectomy.
Minor detail, but an important note. Puberty blockers are not actually part of transition. There are people who start on puberty blockers, realize that transition is not right for them, and go off puberty blockers and have a normal puberty. That's literally what they're for, is to buy a child time to make sure to minimize the number of detransitioners later.
It's easy to get a double mastectomy.
It is not. With 209 nationwide over 7 years, it is demonstrably not. It's not like you can walk into the store and say, sign me up. No, you still have to be in counseling for a long period of time and have parental approval and have doctor sign off and have your health insurance cover it. There's a lot. You can't just go do it on a whim.
It's really, one
Wait,
phone.
what? What do you mean what do you mean it's easy?
Oh, all you have to do is go to a gender clinic and say that you are transgender or non-binary and you would like to get your breasts removed.
There is some quibbling in the community as to whether non-binary people count as trans. Definitionally, they do, because trans is just identifying as a gender other than the one you were assigned at birth. A non-binary person falls under that umbrella. However, because there's two different stages, tiers, if you will, where a person can identify as non-binary, either at the gender identity level or at the gender expression level, there's some disagreement among non-binary people as to whether they are trans or just non-binary. And the label can include them if they want it to, but they shouldn't feel compelled to take the label upon themselves if they don't want it to.
You go through a very quick process, no mental health assessment.
No, that's not true. And quick, what do you mean by quick? It's interesting that Peter has to ask so many clarifying questions. And also, this isn't actually about the ballot initiative. But I left it in because it shows how deceitful and duplicitous Erin is, and also where she's coming from. What facts is she basing her movement upon? And it turns out there's very little, and what little there is mostly made up.
And away you go.
Do they need the parents' permission for, do you have to go in with the parent or the guardian?
So under 18 in California, you need to have parental consent.
So it's not just the kid wandering into a clinic and saying, sign me up, doc? We're clear on that? I suppose I'll give her credit for being honest about that one. That's true. You do need a parent on board, at least one. You can't just do it quickly all on your own.
The consent's not even real. And I'll explain, because when you go to a gender clinic, when your child is suffering with gender dysphoria, so they have the children go into one room, parents are sent into another room, and those parents are taught that their children will commit if they don't do this.
We've heard this before. In fact, those of you who watch my channel have seen this argument before in a fake documentary that Aaron Friday was in. No, that's not happening. There's tales of this sort of thing that seem to go back to Chloe Cole. People who have heard Chloe Cole speak tend to repeat this tale, but there's no verification of it. The therapists that have gone on record about this have all said no one is trained to do that. In fact, it's unethical. They're trained not to do that. But the really key piece here is Aaron just said that the parents are separated from the child. And then the parents are presented with this false dichotomy based on dubious information. Now, to be clear, statistically, a trans child is far more likely to do self-harm. However, posing it as if it were either they transition or they will suffer grievous self-harm, that's not true. There's a higher risk. It's a legitimate thing to warn the parents. There is a much higher risk. But to say this will happen if you don't, that's not true. But the good news is that doesn't happen. Because as Aaron just posed the story, the children are separated from the parents. In every other version of the story, as Chloe Cole told it, the doctor says it right in front of the kids. And that's an important distinction because it shows Aaron's version is made up. Shock and surprise. Chloe's probably is too, but it's less falsifiable.
And so this is very cult-like, separating the parents because they have to work on the parents to get the consent. And then they work on the kids by teaching the kids of, the panoply of treatments that they can get and how life-saving they are and how amazing it is to be trans.
Yes, a child who wants to go to a gender clinic because they're identifying as trans needs to be told how wonderful it is to be trans, if only they'll opt in. Except they're already at the clinic, Aaron. That's several steps down the line. They already want this. And also, what is this multiplicity of options? There are several steps that a person could take. None of them are obligatory, however. There's simple puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy. There's counseling. There's social transition. There are a lot of options. And the point is to deal with the personal discomfort, the dysphoria, if you will. And as with every other medical situation, you only intervene as far as you need to fix the problem. If a person socially transitions and then is fine, then good, you can stop there. If a person takes hormones and then is fine, good, you can stop there. And most people do. The vast majority of transgender individuals never go farther than hormone replacement therapy.
I was wondering if you could please drill down on what your idea to the solution of the problem is, the bill.
Well, first and foremost is to ban all these gender interventions on minors.
Oh, good. So her solution to this non-problem is to ban evidence-based life-saving medical care. We're just going to ban it. Who cares how many people die? It's only life-saving care. Aaron doesn't like it, so it needs to be banned.
You're talking about people under the age of 18.
Correct.
Okay, because you said there, and I'm not disagreeing with you. You said, even young adults or something, but this is, if someone wants to transition on their 18th birthday, your ballot initiative will have nothing to say about it.
That's correct. The ballot initiative only affects those over 18 when it...
Wait. You said that's correct twice, and then goes on to start explaining how it's not correct?
Relates to sports.
Just relates to sports. Okay. So yeah, that's correct. This under 18 only bill, which she verified only affects under 18s twice, also affects adults. Yes, it affects them too. How? She doesn't say, because she's only on the show to talk about what the ballot initiative does, but she doesn't say.
Could you go into further what level of control parents have to stop authorities from enabling and influencing their child to change? I mean, is it possible to just preemptively call the school and say, listen, I don't want my child to be given binders, breast binder. I mean, is that an option?
So this is a little bit of a tangent from the actual ballot initiative. But again, as Erin herself mentioned earlier, you need parental consent to transition. It's the parent doesn't have to do anything to stop it. They just have to not consent. But Peter's taking it down into social transition, not medical transition, which is what is ostensibly being addressed here. Can you stop your child from socially transitioning when they're not directly under your thumb? I wonder how Erin's going to answer.
You can try it, but it doesn't work. Here in the state of California, there are school policies actually on their website. It's a school policy that states that schools are supposed to keep a child's transgender identity secret from the parents. And that,
first of all, there's not one website that all schools in California. California is a gigantic state with millions of people. There's not just one school website. Second, it's not a policy, it's a state law. And third, Erin is lying about what it says. It's not keeping secrets. It's the schools are prohibited by state law and court rulings from disclosing privileged information. If a child discloses something to the school staff that does not entitle the school staff to disclose that to additional people, even if they're the parents. Nothing about keeping secrets. The school just does not have the right to do that. This may be a helpful time to remind everyone that Erin Friday is a lawyer. She knows this, and she's deliberately misrepresenting it in a dishonest way. I wonder why that could be.
That's one of the things the ballot initiative will do away with.
Yeah.
And it will also forbid the school from socially transitioning a child. Once the child is concretized into believing that they can actually jump sex, it's really hard to pull them out.
Well, that's an interesting way to phrase things. Once a child realizes they can actually jump sex, transition, then it's hard to pull them out. It sounds to me like a child in that situation is trans, because a kid who isn't trans doesn't want to transition. That's sort of definitional. It's axiomatic. That's about all Erin has to say on the matter, though she does have one more brief bout of honesty.
No, I'm a bigot. I'm a transphobe.
She says it laughingly, but she actually is being honest there. She is a bigot and a transphobe. And I don't just say that because I've drawn my conclusions based on facts and evidence. She's proud of it. In fact, here's Past Ember to elaborate.
They will sit and listen to stories of parents talking about their children and detransitioners. Hopefully we can start persuading them that gender affirmation model shouldn't be the one size fits all.
What's this now? What are these labels? All that reasonable talk, and yet here she is sending out mailers with stickers that say sex is binary. Disorders of sexual development are not evidence that sex is on a spectrum. There are no true trans. Only women give birth. A woman is an adult human female. Humans cannot change sex, etc., etc. Don't believe this malarkey that she's a reasonable person just trying to spread sense. She is an extremist, and she's proud of it.
No, I'm a bigot. I'm a transphobe.
Get lost.
And that's not all. There's so much news and so little time, but our final story for this week comes to us from the ACLU of Ohio. In a victory for transgender Ohioans and their families, the Supreme Court of Ohio has rejected a request by the state to narrow a temporary restraining order blocking the state from enforcing a ban on gender-affirming medical care for trans youth. The decision denies the state's effort to narrow the scope of the temporary restraining order and allows the case to proceed in the Franklin County Court, where its trial is currently scheduled for July 15th. ACLU Ohio's legal director, Frida Levinson, said in a statement, quote, "This decision was correct. The state's request was egregious. The scope of the temporary restraining order was necessary and appropriate to prevent the constitutional violations and other irreparable harm that would immediately occur if HB 68 were permitted to take effect. Our legal battle will continue until this cruel restriction is permanently overturned." Harper Selden, another attorney on the case, said, quote, "The state's claim that this was an emergency because it could not enforce an unconstitutional statute was utterly absurd. Far from creating an emergency, the challenged temporary injunction merely maintains the status quo in Ohio, that trans youth be permitted access to life-saving medical care with support from parents and doctors. We're thankful the court did not allow the state to subvert the rights of trans youth and their families." Several legal organizations have analyzed the Ohio bill and found that it violates the state constitution in numerous ways. The actual trial will begin on July 15th, but for now, the residents of Ohio are safe. And that is certainly good news. For the TransPositions, I've been Ember Belrad.